Welcome back to the channel, everybody. I am Lee Durfee, author of The Forgetting Moon and The Blackest Heart, both books published by Simon & Schuster's Saga Press. Today I'm going to be reviewing Koko by Peter Straub. Mr. Straub passed away just recently, so it inspired me to start rereading a lot of his stuff. So that's what we're going to be doing on the channel. Within the next few months, we're going to try to read a bunch of Peter Straub books and get them reviewed. We're going to start with Koko, which came out in 1988, and it is book number 1 in his Blue Rose trilogy. So let's look at the covers first, because you know I always love graphic design and cover art. This one's cool. It's got the faint outline of a evil face, stem of a rose, of course the author's name, and a nice silver foil. It's just a really sweet looking paperback. And if we bring the camera closer to the other two books in the trilogy, so the other two books in the trilogy are Mystery and The Throat, and together you can see that if we squeeze them together like that, it becomes like a panoramic view of a blue rose with the stem. That's pretty cool. It's pretty cool that the publisher decided, had foresight to do that. Because, rarely the publishers have foresight. When it comes to covers and the size of the books and, it's a shit show out there in publishing that they quite often get wrong. And this time they did it right. Koko, what's it about? Peter Straub is known as one of our classic horror writers. I did review The Talisman and The Black House, which Peter Straub co-wrote with Stephen King. So I have reviewed Straub before, just none of his the works that he does himself. So it's about Vietnam War, the aftermath of the Vietnam War. It's not necessarily a horror novel, or a thriller novel, or a mystery novel. It's kind of all three combined. And it's about these 4 Vietnam vets who get together in Washington, D.C. to go to the Vietnam War Memorial, a place which I've been. It's a pretty cool place. There's the names of the dead soldiers just goes on and on and on and on and on at that memorial. It's just a very it's just a good place to visit if you really want to appreciate the soldiers of all the armed forces and all that. So, but these guys were Vietnam vets. The book takes place in '88, so the Vietnam War would have only been like 15 years prior to '88. So these guys are probably still in their early 30s, because they were soldiers as teenagers, most of them. So they're still young men, and they still are just traumatized by the war. And they want to get together, their platoon, what's left of their platoon, they want to get together and have this reunion at the Vietnam War Memorial in Washington, D.C. The names of these guys are Michael Poole, Harry Beans Beaver. Harry Beaver, that's his name. It's the name of the guy. But they call him Beans. So he's Harry Beans Beaver. And then there's Puma. That's his last name. And then we've got Connor Linkletter. And then there's we'll talk about the other people in the book a little bit later. But they get together in Vietnam, but for the Vietnam War Memorial. And we get introduced to these characters one by one. We get their backstories. Peter Straub really spends a lot of time at the front of the book just giving us their backstories, giving us little snippets and flashbacks of who they are now and who they were in the Vietnam War, and some of the things they did, some of the stuff that happened in Vietnam. It's very harrowing. If I was to say this is a horror novel rather than a thriller, a thriller or a mystery, the horror isn't necessarily ghosts, goblins, and monsters. The horror is just their experiences in Vietnam. I'll be honest. There's never been a horror movie that's ever been made that actually scared me. Like Halloween, Friday the 13th, Scream. None of these actually scared me. I knew what they were. They're just movie. The one movie that scared the ever-loving shit out of me was the movie Platoon. When I first saw that movie, I was scared out of my mind during that movie. It was the first real-life war movie that I'd ever seen, and I was at a young enough age that I knew that eventually, if there was a war, I might get drafted into that war. And was watching that Platoon movie, that was horrifying. That's where the horror lies in this story. Also in the story, there is news reports of a serial killer in the Far East that kills and leaves sort of this moniker at the crime scene, and it's Koko. Now, these four Vietnam soldiers, are really the only ones that know what that phrase means, Koko. And I think my notes fell to the floor. I will pin them back up. There we go. Yeah, I will pin them back up because I wanted to anyway, I'll edit all this stuff out. Trust me, because I just wasted a lot of time. So some of the themes of this are you really the same person that you are as a soldier at 19 years old, that you were when you were a kid, that you were when you're like a 32-year-old man? I mean, how many stages of life do you go through where you're an innocent kid, violent soldier doing probably things you shouldn't be doing, and then an adult trying to deal with the fact that you were once an innocent kid, and then you just became something you never thought you would become, and now you're back in the real world? That is one of the themes that runs through this, which is almost like a horror novel in itself, because these guys, I mean, as they try to figure out Koko, because they're the only ones that know. I mean, there's a serial killer through the Far East, and they're the only ones that know what Koko means. And we won't get into the sort of the ending of the book. I'll leave it spoiler free. But as these guys travel through the seedier parts of Singapore and Bangkok and New York City, and Peter Straub just gives us sort of a wandering, meandering view of all of this stuff that's taking place. It really starts to build on itself until who is the murderer? Is it someone that they knew in Vietnam? Is it someone that they're close to? Is it one of them? Those are the questions. And so it's just an interesting book. Like I said, I wouldn't call it horror. I wouldn't call it thriller. I wouldn't call it mystery. I'd kind of call it all of the above. And so that is my review. I just thought it was really well written. The characters, each one of them is very well done. You get the backstory of all of them, not just the backstory of their lives, but what happened to them in Vietnam, which is terrible, and then what's happened to them since Vietnam, and then a pretty darn good murder mystery, mixed in with that. Book number 1 of the Blue Rose trilogy. I give it a solid 8.5 out of 10, and we will be reading these other two pretty quick here, because I want to see how they all tie together. I mean, I read them way back. I don't remember much about any of this stuff, because I read these things a long time ago, and just this reread is kind of cool. So anyway, bye.